The sound of the church bell echoed through the crisp September air, tolling a final farewell to Michael Hayes. Rows of folding chairs stood in neat order beneath a cloudless Midwestern sky, but the weight of grief was heavier than the sun above. Daniel Hayes sat in the front row, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. It had been years since he had seen his brother alive, and now the silence between them was eternal. Daniel had left this small Illinois town long ago, chasing architecture dreams in Chicago, leaving behind the farm, the fights, and the family responsibilities. Yet here he was again, back where it all began, staring at the polished wood of Michael's casket, wishing for words he would never get the chance to say. Around him the town gathered, faces familiar but distant, eyes filled with sympathy but also judgment. They all knew Daniel had been gone too long. When the pastor's voice softened into a prayer, Daniel's gaze wandered to the horizon, where the farmland stretched endlessly, brown and brittle after months without rain. He remembered when those fields were green and alive, back when his father was alive, when Michael believed they could carry on the family tradition. Daniel even then had felt trapped. He wanted city lights, glass towers, not silos and barns. That choice had carved a rift between the brothers so deep it had never been mended. A voice broke his thoughts. "I'm sorry for your loss," murmured Evelyn Carter, the elderly woman who had lived next door to the Hayes family since Daniel was a boy. Her silver hair gleamed in the sun, her wrinkled hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Your brother was a good man. He carried more on his shoulders than anyone knew." Daniel nodded, unable to answer. Evelyn's words stung because he hadn't been there to see the weight Michael carried. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. As the service ended, Daniel stood near the headstone where both his parents already rested. The name Michael Hayes was freshly carved, and seeing it chiseled into granite made the finality sink in. Around him, mourners drifted away toward the gravel parking lot. Only Evelyn lingered. "You're going to the farm, aren't you?" she asked softly. Daniel hesitated. "I don't know. I haven't set foot there in years." "You should," Evelyn replied, her eyes steady. "Michael left things behind. Things you ought to see." Her words carried a strange weight, but Daniel didn't press her. Instead, he looked across the distant fields, the roof of the farmhouse barely visible above the trees, a place frozen in time, holding memories both bitter and sweet. A chill swept through him, though the air was warm. He remembered his father's voice commanding discipline, the creak of the porch swing where his mother once sang. The nights he and Michael argued in the barn about duty versus freedom. The farm had been a battleground and a sanctuary, and stepping onto that soil again felt like opening an old wound, yet something inside him shifted. Perhaps guilt, perhaps longing. Michael had stayed, fought for the land, carried burdens Daniel had abandoned. And now Michael was gone, leaving Daniel to face the ghosts he had tried so hard to escape. He whispered to himself, "What if I don't want to know what's there?" But the silence of the cemetery gave no answer. The day's sunlight faded slowly, and Daniel realized he couldn't leave without at least walking through the old farmhouse. If nothing else, he owed that to his brother. He drew a deep breath and turned toward his rental car. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he walked, but the sound was drowned by the heaviness in his chest. Something waited for him at the farm, something that would not let him rest until he faced it, and before he left the cemetery, his thoughts tightened around one truth. The journey back to that farmhouse was not just about Michael. It was about confronting everything he had run from. If stories like this hold you the way they hold Daniel, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. What Daniel finds when he steps onto that deserted farm will change him forever. The drive from the cemetery to the Hayes farm took less than 15 minutes, yet to Daniel, it felt like a journey across decades. The two-lane road curved through endless stretches of cornfields, most of them dry and yellow, already cut back for the season. Telephone poles leaned slightly, their wires humming in the late afternoon breeze. Every turn, every mailbox carried echoes of familiarity he had tried for years to bury. When the farmhouse finally came into view, Daniel slowed the car almost to a crawl. The place looked smaller than he remembered, as if time had shrunk it. Paint peeled from the clapboard siding, shutters dangled loose, and the once bright red barn had faded to a weary pink. Grass grew wild along the gravel drive, and the fence that used to keep the cattle in now leaned like an old man with failing knees. He parked by the porch and sat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel. The smell of dry earth drifted in through the cracked window, mixed with a faint trace of old hay. His chest tightened with a cocktail of dread and nostalgia. He hadn't expected the sight of the place to hit him this hard. The creak of the porch boards was the same as when he was a boy. He remembered sneaking out at night with Michael, the two of them whispering about baseball games and girls, before their father's voice would boom from the window, ordering them back inside. That porch had held laughter once, but also the sharp edge of arguments. A voice startled him from his thoughts. "Never thought I'd see you back here." Daniel turned. Evelyn Carter stood by the fence, her cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders. She must have followed him from the cemetery. Her eyes softened as she looked at the house. "Time's been cruel to this place," she said quietly. Daniel forced a faint smile. "I guess so, Michael." He tried to keep it alive, didn't he? Evelyn nodded slowly. "More than you know." That farm was his pride, even when it nearly broke him. He wanted it to stand for something. She studied Daniel for a moment. "You feel it, don't you? The pull of it." He looked away, his jaw tight. "I don't know what I feel. Guilt, maybe. Regret. A lot of things I don't want to admit." Evelyn leaned against the fence, her voice gentler now. "Michael carried burdens he never spoke about. He never blamed you for leaving, no matter what you think, but he never stopped hoping you'd come back." The words sank into him like stones. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to hide the sting in his eyes. "And now it's too late." "Maybe not," Evelyn replied. "Sometimes places hold on to things people can't say out loud. This farm has more to tell you than Michael ever could." Her tone left Daniel unsettled, though he couldn't explain why. He looked at the barn in the distance, its doors closed, shadows stretching long in the fading light. The silence of the land pressed against him, heavy but expectant, like it was waiting for him to take a step. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low, "why do I feel like you're keeping something from me?" She gave a small, knowing smile. "Because some truths don't come easy, Daniel. You'll have to find them yourself." With that, she turned and walked back toward her own house, leaving him standing on the porch with questions burning in his mind. Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of the farm pressing deeper into his bones. He pulled the screen door open, its hinges shrieking like an old wound reopening. Dust motes swirled in the fading light as he stepped inside, the air heavy with the smell of wood, mildew, and abandonment. His pulse quickened. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his shoes reminded him this was no longer Michael's farm or their father's. It was his now, whether he wanted it or not, and something inside those walls waited to be uncovered. The farmhouse smelled of dust and forgotten years. Daniel stepped carefully across the warped floorboards, his shoes stirring faint clouds that caught the last glow of daylight, seeping through half-drawn curtains. The air was stale, heavy with silence, as if the house itself held its breath, waiting for him to acknowledge its secrets. The living room still held the old plaid sofa from their childhood, its fabric frayed, cushions sunken in from years of use. A family photo sat crooked on the mantel, two boys with their arms around each other, their parents smiling proudly behind them. Daniel touched the frame, brushing off a layer of dust. His throat tightened. They had once been inseparable, he and Michael, before ambition and resentment carved a canyon between them. He moved slowly down the hallway, peering into rooms where curtains sagged and paint curled from the walls. His hand brushed the doorframe of Michael's old bedroom. He remembered sneaking in as kids to share comic books under a flashlight. Then later, as teenagers, their voices rising in bitter fights about staying or leaving. That door had seen more slammed arguments than apologies. In the kitchen, Daniel opened a cabinet and found it nearly empty. Just a few chipped mugs, one with the faded logo of the local grain co-op. On the counter lay a stack of unopened mail, yellowed at the edges. He sifted through bills, letters, advertisements, each envelope marked with Michael's name. Most were unpaid notices, demands for money the farm clearly hadn't been able to provide. Beside them sat a small wooden box. Daniel lifted the lid. Inside, photographs lay scattered. Their father standing by the tractor, his mother kneading bread at the kitchen table, Michael in his late 20s holding a calf in his arms. Tucked between the photos were handwritten notes. He unfolded one carefully. September 14th, 2019. Another night without rain. The fields look worse every day. But I can't let it go. This farm is all I have left of Dad, and I'll fight to keep it alive. Daniel wouldn't understand. He made his choice, and I don't blame him. But I can't walk away. Not from this. Daniel's hands trembled as he read. Each page revealed a man battling against more than just failing crops, loneliness, debt, exhaustion. He found another entry, March 2nd, 2020. Evelyn brought over soup again. I think she worries I don't eat enough. She's probably right. Some nights I fall asleep at the table, too tired to climb the stairs. I don't tell her about the calls from the bank. No point in worrying her more. Daniel pressed his palm to his forehead, shame burning through him. He had been in Chicago chasing contracts and clients, while his brother carried a weight that would have broken most men. He felt like an intruder now, stepping into a life he had abandoned, glimpsing a pain he hadn't cared to imagine. He carried the box to the old dining table, spreading the photographs and journals before him. The scratched wood bore grooves where he and Michael had once carved initials as boys. Now it bore testimony to his brother's solitude. The light outside dimmed, painting the kitchen in shadows. Daniel flipped through more notes, finding sketches of crop rotations, diagrams of machinery repairs, and budget lists scrawled with numbers that didn't add up. It wasn't just stubborn pride. Michael had fought with everything he had, trying to keep the farm alive. Daniel leaned back, his chest heavy. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered into the silence. The house offered no reply. Only the wind against the windows, a low moan, answered him. As he gathered the papers, one photo slipped free and landed face down. He picked it up and turned it over. Michael stood in the barn, a determined set to his jaw, holding blueprints against a stack of hay bales. Daniel frowned. Blueprints? He hadn't known his brother ever drew plans for anything. That image gnawed at him, stirring questions he couldn't ignore. Somewhere beyond these walls more answers waited. The farmhouse grew darker as twilight settled, but Daniel's eyes kept returning to that photograph of Michael in the barn, holding rolled-up plans like a man guarding a secret. Curiosity and unease tugged at him until he could no longer sit still. The barn had always been the heart of the farm, a place of work, laughter, and fights. If Michael left something there, Daniel needed to see it. The door hinges groaned as he pushed the barn doors open, the stale smell of hay and oil spilling out. Inside, the air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and rusting tools. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the weathered boards, casting long stripes across the floor. The tractors stood like slumbering beasts, their paint chipped, their tires sagging. Cobwebs draped the corners like forgotten curtains. Daniel walked slowly, trailing his hand across an old wooden workbench stained with grease and paint. He could almost hear echoes of his father barking orders, Michael's laughter, his own teenage protests. Every tool seemed to whisper memories he wasn't ready to face. But beneath those memories was something else, a faint sense of expectation, as though the barn itself waited for him to uncover what Michael had left behind. His flashlight beam swept across the ground until it caught something unusual, scuff marks near a stack of rusted equipment. He knelt, pushing aside an old plow blade, revealing a section of floorboard that didn't quite match the rest. His pulse quickened. He pressed his fingers to the wood. It shifted slightly under his touch. He hesitated, heart pounding. Why would Michael hide something here? For a moment, he considered leaving it untouched, afraid of what he might find, but the gnawing questions inside him refused to let go. He pulled harder, and the board came loose with a sharp crack, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside lay a small iron chest, its surface dark with age, Michael's name carved faintly into the lid. Daniel froze, his breath shallow. The chest looked heavy, important, something hidden away with intention. His hands shook as he dragged it into the open. The lock was still intact, though rusted from years in hiding. He tugged at it, but it didn't budge. Frustration surged. He searched the barn for tools, grabbing an old hammer and wedging it against the latch. Metal screeched, but the lock held firm. Sweat dripped down his temple, his breath ragged. A voice startled him. "What are you doing in here at this hour?" Daniel spun around, the hammer still in his hand. Evelyn Carter stood at the doorway, her arms folded, her eyes catching the pale light. For a moment, the barn felt colder. I found this," Daniel stammered, gesturing toward the chest. "It was hidden under the floorboards. Did you know about it?" Evelyn stepped closer, her face unreadable. She looked at the chest, then at Daniel. "I knew Michael kept things to himself. He said some truths weren't ready to be shared." Daniel's voice sharpened. "Truths about what? About the debts?" "About what he went through alone. I deserve to know." Evelyn held his gaze, her voice calm but weighted. "Be careful, Daniel. Sometimes answers don't heal. They only dig deeper wounds. Michael carried more than you can imagine. Opening that chest won't just give you information. It'll give you responsibility." Her words sank like stones, heavy with warning. Daniel looked down at the chest, his chest tightening. "I can't just ignore it," he said quietly. "I left once, Evelyn. I won't turn my back again." Evelyn sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Then be ready for what you'll find. Michael hid it for a reason. The question is, are you ready to carry that reason?" Daniel's grip tightened on the hammer. The barn seemed to close in around him, shadows deepening, silence pressing heavier. The chest waited, silent and immovable, a guardian of secrets that could not remain buried forever. And as he stood there, staring at the engraved letters of his brother's name, Daniel knew there was no turning back. The chest sat in the barn like a silent challenge, its iron frame unyielding beneath Daniel's grip. He had spent nearly an hour working at the lock, sweat dripping down his brow, his muscles aching from the effort. Finally, with one last strike of the hammer, the rusted metal gave way. The sound echoed through the barn, sharp and final, like the breaking of a seal that had held more than just iron. Daniel's breath caught as he pried the lid open. Inside lay neat stacks of papers bundled with twine, their edges yellowed but carefully preserved. On top rested a folded envelope bearing his brother's name in bold ink. Beneath it, Daniel glimpsed rolled blueprints, sketches, and documents that seemed far from ordinary farm records. He picked up the first stack and untied it. His eyes scanned bills marked past due in angry red stamps, notices from the bank, and letters demanding payments he hadn't known Michael owed. The weight of his brother's silence hit him hard. Michael had been drowning financially, but he had never called for help. Beneath the bills were deeds, contracts, and land surveys. Daniel frowned as he unfolded a larger sheet, a detailed map of the farm, marked with grids and notations. At the bottom, Michael's handwriting sprawled across the margin: projected expansion, sustainable crops, irrigation overhaul, renewable energy integration. Daniel stared at the words, his heart thudding. His brother, the man who had always mocked Daniel's love for city planning and design, had been creating plans of his own. Not just plans to keep the farm alive, but to transform it. He reached for the rolled blueprints and spread them across the workbench. The drawings were rough but purposeful, layouts for greenhouses, solar panel placements, even a design for a community co-op market. Michael had been planning a future that no one in town seemed to know about. Daniel whispered to himself, "You are building something bigger than all of us." His voice broke on the last word. A pang of regret cut through him as he imagined the late nights Michael must have spent drafting these visions. Alone in the barn, his only company the sound of crickets and the hum of old machinery. While Daniel had been dining in high-rise restaurants, his brother had been sketching hope on scraps of paper. He picked up the envelope with Michael's name. His fingers trembled as he opened it, but inside was nothing more than a single blank sheet of paper. Confusion rippled through him. Was it left unfinished, or had the words been lost with time? He set it aside carefully, unsure if meaning hid in its emptiness. Among the papers, Daniel found notes addressed to potential investors, letters unsent, drafts scribbled and crossed out. The Hayes farm is more than land. It's a vision of sustainable agriculture for the next generation. Michael had been reaching for something greater, even if he lacked the confidence to send the words. Daniel sank onto a wooden stool, the papers spread around him like fragments of a puzzle. He pressed his hands to his face, overwhelmed. He had always thought Michael stayed behind out of stubbornness, chained to the past. But here in the hidden chest lay proof of the opposite. Michael had been looking toward the future. The barn seemed to hum with energy now, no longer a grave of memories, but a vault of possibilities. Daniel felt a stirring deep inside him, a pull he hadn't expected. Shame for leaving, awe for what Michael had tried to achieve, and an ache of longing to know more. He looked down at the plans again, tracing the lines with his fingertips. The thought he couldn't suppress whispered louder with each passing moment. Maybe this wasn't just Michael's dream. Maybe it was meant for both of them. But as that realization grew, so too did the weight of it. Because inheriting his brother's vision meant inheriting his unfinished battles as well, and Daniel wasn't sure yet if he was ready. The papers lay scattered across the barn's workbench, corners lifting in the draft that slipped through the boards. Daniel sat hunched forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at the blueprints as though they might speak. His chest still ached with the weight of discovery, but something else nagged at him. Evelyn's words, her warning that truths carried burdens. He sifted through another bundle of papers, flipping past crop rotation charts and handwritten calculations. Then his hand froze. Beneath a stack of notes sealed in a plain white envelope was his own name written in Michael's firm handwriting, Daniel. For a long moment he didn't move. The barn seemed to grow utterly silent, as though waiting for him to open it. His fingers trembled when he tore the seal. Inside was a letter, carefully folded, the ink dark and steady. He unfolded it slowly, the first line striking deep into his chest. "Danny, if you're reading this, I'm gone." Daniel's throat tightened. No one had called him Danny since they were kids. He forced himself to continue. "I don't know if you'll ever come back here, but I hope you do. I know we didn't part on the best of terms. I was angry, you were stubborn, and we both thought we were right. Maybe we both were. You wanted a different life, and I wanted to hold on to this one. But don't think for a second I didn't respect what you did. Truth is, I admired it." Daniel pressed the paper to the workbench for a moment, closing his eyes. His brother's voice seemed to echo in the barn, strong yet weary. The letter continued. "This farm isn't just land, Danny. It's every sacrifice Dad made, every meal Mom cooked, every laugh we shared under this roof. I tried to carry it alone, but no man can carry something this big by himself. I made plans, you'll see them. They're rough, but they're full of hope, maybe too much hope." Tears blurred Daniel's vision, the words swimming before him. "You have the skills I never did. You can see things in lines and designs that I couldn't. I know I never said it, but I was proud of you even when I called you selfish for leaving. Maybe I was jealous. Maybe I wished I had the courage to chase a dream the way you did. But this land, it's still our dream, even if I couldn't finish it." Daniel's breath came uneven, his chest heaving as though the letter itself weighed 100 pounds. "I don't expect you to stay. I don't even expect you to care. But if you do, if some part of you still feels tied to this soil, then don't let it die. Protect it. Build something out of it, and know that no matter how much we fought, I loved you, brother. Always." At the bottom, Michael's name was signed with a shaky flourish. Daniel lowered the letter, his hand covering his mouth as a sob broke free. The barn blurred as tears spilled, hot and relentless, carrying years of regret he had tried to bury. He thought of their last conversation years ago, bitter words thrown like stones, and how he had walked away without looking back. Now the apology he had never given sat like a stone in his chest. He whispered hoarsely, "I should have been here, Mike. I should have helped you." But the barn answered only with the creak of beams and the soft rustle of hay. Daniel folded the letter carefully, pressing it to his chest as if he could hold his brother close one last time. In that moment, something inside him shifted. The city, his career, the life he had built, All of it seemed small compared to the weight of his brother's final words. The farm wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a promise, and now that promise was his to carry. Morning broke with a pale light spreading over the fields, the dew glistening on grass that had grown untended for too long. Daniel stood on the porch with Michael's letter folded in his pocket, the weight of it pressing against his chest like a vow he couldn't ignore. He knew he couldn't carry this burden alone. If his brother had been working on something for the farm, the town must have known, at least in part. He needed answers, and he needed allies. The first stop was the diner on Main Street, a place that smelled of bacon grease and fresh coffee, exactly as it had when he was young. Heads turned when he walked in. Conversations slowed. Some nodded politely, others whispered behind hands. He was the Hayes boy who had left, the brother who hadn't come back until it was too late. At the counter, he ordered black coffee. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, set it down. "Didn't think I'd see you back here, Daniel," she said. "I didn't think I'd be back either," he admitted. "Not like this." A man at a nearby table leaned over, his voice sharp. "Your brother worked himself half to death keeping that place going. Where were you then?" The words cut deep. Daniel met his gaze. "I was gone, and I regret that more than you know. But I'm here now. I found Michael's plans for the farm. He wanted to change things, make it something new. I need to know if anyone helped him." A murmur rippled through the room. Some shook their heads, others looked down at their plates. Finally, an older man with weathered hands spoke up. "Michael came to me about buying seed, said he was working on something different, but he couldn't afford much. I figured it was another dream that'd die in the dirt." Daniel clenched his jaw. It wasn't just a dream, he had blueprints, plans for renewable systems, sustainable crops. He believed in it. He believed it could work. The diner grew quiet. For a moment, Daniel thought he had said too much. Then a voice from the back spoke. "Belief don't pay the bank," Sheriff Tom Miller said, rising from a booth. His uniform was neatly pressed, his eyes sharp under the brim of his hat. He walked forward, his boots heavy on the linoleum. "Your brother was a good man, Daniel. Everyone here knows that, but he was fighting a battle bigger than him. And now you come back talking about plans like you're going to fix everything. Folks around here have long memories. They don't forget who walked away." Daniel stood slowly, facing the sheriff. "You're right, I did walk away, but Michael didn't. He stayed, he fought, and he nearly built something incredible. I can't change the past, but I can try to finish what he started. I owe him that much." Tom studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Words are easy. This town's heard plenty of them. What we respect is work. Show us you can do more than talk, and maybe folks will listen." The challenge hung in the air. Daniel nodded. "Then that's what I'll do." As he left the diner, whispers followed him. Some doubtful, some curious, a few almost hopeful. But the message was clear. If he wanted to honor Michael's vision, he would have to earn the trust of the very people who doubted him most. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist. Daniel looked down Main Street, its storefronts worn but steady, its people bound by years of struggle and resilience. If Michael had believed this community could be part of something new, Daniel would have to believe it too. The question was whether they would ever believe in him. The drive back to Chicago was quiet, the highway stretching like a grey ribbon through miles of flat farmland. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter than he needed to, his mind replaying the sheriff's words. "Show us you can do more than talk." They were fair, he knew, but they cut deep. Every mile that carried him closer to the skyline of the city felt heavier than the last. By the time he parked in front of his apartment building, the city had swallowed him whole again. Tall glass towers gleaming in the sunlight, streets buzzing with traffic, people rushing with their lives. For years, this had been his refuge, a place where he could reinvent himself far away from the shadows of the farm. But now, as he climbed the stairs and unlocked his door, the silence inside felt emptier than the farmhouse ever had. He dropped his keys on the counter, poured himself a drink, and sat by the window overlooking the street below. He had everything he once wanted: a respected career, a modern apartment, a city that never judged him for leaving. Yet the memory of Michael's letter, folded carefully in his jacket pocket, gnawed at him. The words felt less like a farewell and more like a hand on his shoulder, urging him to carry what his brother could not. That night, sleep came fitfully. Dreams of cornfields blurred with the sound of city traffic. He saw Michael's face, not sickly or tired, but determined, standing in the barn with blueprints in hand. And always, there was the echo of his brother's voice. "Don't let it die." The next morning, he sat across from Laura in a quiet cafe. She had been his wife once, years ago, until their marriage crumbled under the weight of his long hours, his ambition, his inability to stay grounded. She was older now, softer around the eyes, but her presence still carried the same calm he had once relied on. "You look terrible," she said, stirring her coffee. "Funeral hit you harder than you expected." Daniel gave a dry laugh. "You could say that. Being back there, it's like everything I ran from is waiting for me, asking why I left." Laura studied him carefully. "Why did you?" He hesitated. "Because I was scared of ending up stuck, failing like my father did. I thought leaving was the only way to build something of my own. But now, Michael stayed. He fought for that land until the end, and he wanted me to keep it alive." Her expression softened, but her words were steady. "Daniel, you've always run when things got too heavy. With us, with your family, even with yourself. That farm, it isn't just a piece of property, it's responsibility. If you take it on, you can't half commit. Are you ready for that?" Daniel stared at the table, tracing the rim of his cup. "I don't know. Part of me wants to walk away again, go back to work, and pretend none of this ever happened. But the other part, it feels like I'd be betraying him all over again if I did." Laura leaned forward, her voice gentler now. "Maybe it isn't about the farm. Maybe it's about you finally facing what you've avoided your whole life, staying, fighting, risking failure. Maybe Michael left you that chance." Her words lingered long after they parted. Daniel walked through the city streets, surrounded by skyscrapers that once inspired him, but now felt hollow. He realized that for the first time, the city seemed less like freedom and more like escape. That evening, he stood on his balcony, watching the sun sink behind the skyline. The letter weighed heavy in his pocket, the memory of Michael's plans pressing harder with every passing hour. He understood now. Whether he was ready or not, the choice was no longer about what he wanted. It was about what was right. And deep down, Daniel knew he couldn't keep running. The following week dragged like an anchor. Daniel returned to work in Chicago, but his focus slipped through his fingers no matter how hard he tried. Drafts piled up on his desk, clients waited for answers, and his phone buzzed endlessly. Yet all he could see when he closed his eyes was Michael's handwriting. All he could hear was his brother's voice echoing in the silence of the barn. One afternoon, he stood in his office, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline. Once that view had given him pride, a sense of conquest. Now it only reminded him of how far he'd run. His reflection in the glass looked tired, worn, like a man caught between two lives. He asked himself the same question he had asked Laura: "Am I ready for this?" The answer came not in words, but in the image of the farmhouse porch and the letter folded neatly in his jacket. By Friday evening, the decision was no longer something to weigh. It was something he felt in his bones. Daniel packed a bag, locked his apartment door behind him, and drove through the night, the city lights fading until the only glow came from the moon above the flat horizon. When he pulled into the gravel drive of the Hayes farm, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in strokes of pink and gold. The house looked just as tired as when he'd left it days before, but this time Daniel didn't see decay. He saw possibility. He carried Michael's blueprints into the kitchen, spreading them across the old dining table. His fingers traced the lines of his brother's sketches, the outlines of greenhouses and solar arrays, his mind already adjusting measurements, considering structural reinforcements, reworking angles. For the first time since the funeral, he felt something beyond grief. He felt purpose. By midday he was outside, hammer in hand, climbing onto the barn roof that had leaked for years. The wood creaked under his weight, shingles cracked beneath his boots, But he worked steadily, stripping away rot and laying new boards. Sweat ran down his back, his muscles ached, but each nail driven into the wood carried the rhythm of commitment. He remembered Michael doing this very work alone, patching holes year after year. Doing it now felt like a silent apology and a promise to continue. As he worked, Evelyn appeared at the fence, her voice carrying across the yard. "Didn't expect to see you up there." Daniel paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Someone had to start. The place isn't going to fix itself." She smiled faintly. "Your brother would have been glad to see you like this." Daniel climbed down, breathing hard. "I don't know if I can finish what he started. But I know I can't walk away again." Evelyn studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That's enough for now, the rest will come." As evening fell, Daniel sat on the porch steps, the repaired section of the barn glowing faintly in the fading light. His hands were blistered, his body sore, but he hadn't felt this alive in years. The silence of the farm no longer felt like judgment. It felt like an invitation. He pulled Michael's letter from his pocket, reading the last lines again. "Don't let it die." Daniel folded the paper carefully and slid it back into his jacket. His brother's dream had become his own, and though the path ahead was uncertain, he had made his choice. The city could wait. His future was here on the soil he once fled. The first week back on the farm carried a strange mix of triumph and unease. Daniel had repaired the barn roof, fixed broken steps on the porch, and cleared weeds from the front path. Each task left him exhausted, but he welcomed the soreness as proof that he was moving forward. Still, beneath the satisfaction of progress lingered the shadow of reality: Michael's debts. One morning, Daniel spread the stack of bills across the kitchen table. The numbers glared at him, uncompromising. Past due notices, bank letters, unpaid loans, each page a reminder that the farm was drowning long before he set foot on it again. His fingers rubbed against his temples as if the pressure might squeeze out a solution. The phone on the wall rang, startling him. He picked up. "Mr. Hayes?" The voice was firm, businesslike. "This is Mark Benson from First State Bank. I trust you've reviewed the outstanding balance on your brother's accounts." Daniel swallowed. "I have. I'm working on things here, trying to get the farm back on track." "Mr. Hayes," the banker interrupted, "your brother was months behind on payments. We extended grace because of his illness, but we can't do that forever. Without a concrete plan, the farm faces foreclosure. Sentiment won't stop that." Daniel gripped the receiver tighter. "I'm not asking for sentiment. I'm asking for time. I found plans my brother was working on. He wanted to turn this farm into something sustainable, something bigger. I can carry that forward, but I need room to prove it." Silence hummed on the line before Benson replied. "Words on paper aren't collateral. Show me results and maybe we'll talk. Until then, the clock is ticking." The call ended, leaving Daniel staring at the receiver, his pulse thudding in his ears. Later that day, Evelyn stopped by with a basket of bread. She studied his drawn face. "You look like a man fighting shadows," Daniel exhaled sharply. "The bank's ready to take the farm. They don't care about Michael's vision or mine. All they see are overdue payments." Evelyn set the basket on the counter. "Banks see numbers. People see work. You want them to believe in you? Show them what you can do." Her words echoed Sheriff Tom's challenge at the diner. Daniel felt the same knot of pressure tightening inside him. He walked out to the fields, staring at the dry soil stretching to the horizon. The earth looked tired, cracked, but he also saw something else: potential. That night, Daniel pored over Michael's notes: crop rotations, greenhouse layouts, irrigation plans. It was overwhelming, yet it stirred his own skills as an architect. He began sketching adjustments, refining structures, calculating costs. Ideas flowed, but so did fear. Could he really pull this off? Or was he setting himself up for the same failure that had crushed his brother? The next morning he drove into town to speak with Benson face to face. The banker's office smelled of polished wood and old paper. Benson sat behind a wide desk, his suit crisp, his eyes cautious. "Mr. Hayes," he said flatly, "why are you here?" Daniel laid Michael's blueprints across the desk. "Because I'm not walking away. My brother believed in this land, and I believe in what he started. I can't promise miracles, but I can promise sweat, hours, and every skill I have. Give me 1 season. Let me prove the farm can breathe again. Benson leaned back, studying him. 1 season won't erase the debt, but if you can demonstrate progress, if the first harvest shows promise, I might consider renegotiating terms. Fail, and the land goes to auction. Do we understand each other? Daniel nodded, the weight of the ultimatum pressing down like a stone. Driving back to the farm, he gripped the wheel, determination and fear colliding inside him. The path ahead was clear. Prove the land still had life, or lose everything his brother fought for. The following days tested Daniel in ways he hadn't expected. Each morning he woke before the sun and pushed his body until dusk. He patched fences, cleaned stalls, and dragged broken machinery from the shed to see what could still be saved. His muscles screamed with every movement, his palms blistered, but the labor grounded him. This wasn't design work on polished paper. It was raw, unrelenting, and real. At first he worked alone. The field stretched out silent and indifferent, the only sound the grind of tools and his own ragged breathing. But as word spread that Daniel Hayes had returned and was working the land himself, curious eyes began to appear at the edge of the property. One morning, as Daniel wrestled with a stubborn tractor engine, an older man approached. He wore faded overalls, his face browned from years in the sun. "Need a hand?" the man asked. Daniel wiped the grease from his forehead. "Depends. You know anything about engines that don't want to cooperate?" The man chuckled. 40 years fixing these things. Name's Carl. Worked with your brother plenty." Daniel stepped aside, relief flickering across his face. "Then please, Carl, be my guest." Carl leaned into the engine with practiced hands, and within minutes had diagnosed the problem. Fuel pumps shot. "Surprised this thing even ran last season." He glanced at Daniel. "Michael always said he'd get to it, but he kept putting it off, too many fires to put out." Daniel nodded, guilt pressing in. Sounds like him. He tried to do everything alone. Carl gave him a steady look. "And you planning to do the same?" The question lingered, heavier than the engine itself. Daniel shook his head. "Not if I can help it. I need people who believe in this place." Word of Carl's visit must have traveled fast. The next day, 2 farmhands who had once worked for Michael showed up, offering to help with fence repairs. By the weekend, Daniel had 6 people pitching in. Some were cautious, others openly skeptical, but all of them curious enough to give their time. Sheriff Tom stopped by one afternoon, leaning against his cruiser while Daniel and the farmhands hammered posts into the ground. "Looks like you're making friends," Tom said. Daniel straightened, sweat dripping down his neck. "Trying to." "I can't do this alone." Tom's gaze swept the field. "Michael worked himself into the ground out here. Folks respected him for it. You'll have to earn that same respect." "I know," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "I don't expect anyone to just trust me because of my last name. I'm not asking for easy faith, I'm asking for a chance." For a long moment the sheriff said nothing. Then he gave a single nod. "Keep working like this and people will notice." As the days rolled on, Daniel felt a shift. The farm no longer seemed to mock him with silence. The clang of hammers, the buzz of engines, and the low murmur of voices brought it back to life. The work was brutal, but every blister and bruise felt like a step toward redemption. At night, he'd collapse into bed, his body aching but his spirit steadier than it had been in years. He often found himself rereading Michael's letter before sleep, as if the words lit a lantern through the exhaustion. One evening, after a long day planting the first seeds of the season, Daniel stood at the edge of the field. The soil smelled rich, the rows straight and ready. He felt a quiet pride bloom inside him. This was only the beginning, but for the first time, he believed he might truly belong here. Behind him, the sheriff's words echoed, "Work earns respect," and Daniel was determined to prove he could. The weeks of hard labor began to stitch Daniel into the rhythm of the farm, but he knew sweat alone wasn't enough. Michael's vision required knowledge he didn't yet have, especially about sustainable farming. He could repair barns and dig fence posts, but the intricate balance of soil, crops, and resources was a language he barely understood. That realization gnawed at him each night as he studied Michael's notes under the dim kitchen light. One morning, Evelyn stopped by with fresh eggs. As she set them on the counter, she watched him leaf through pages of crop data. "You look like a man trying to learn a lifetime of farming overnight," she said. Daniel sighed. "I am, and I'm failing at it. Michael knew the land, but I don't. If I'm going to make his plans real, I need someone who speaks this language better than I ever could." Evelyn tilted her head. "Have you talked to Rebecca Lane?" Daniel blinked. The name stirred memories of summers long ago, barefoot races through the fields, shared lemonade on sweltering days, a girl with a quick laugh and fierce determination. "Rebecca? I haven't seen her in years." "She runs her own place now," Evelyn said. "An organic farm outside of town. Small but thriving. She helped Michael a few times, though he never admitted how much he leaned on her advice. If anyone can guide you, it's her." That afternoon, Daniel drove to the edge of town, following a gravel road lined with wildflowers until he reached a neat spread of land. Rows of vegetables stretched out in tidy order, greenhouses gleamed in the sun, and chickens pecked contentedly in the yard. Rebecca was there, sleeves rolled up, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face as she checked the soil. When she looked up and saw him, surprise flickered across her features. Then her expression hardened slightly. "Daniel Hayes. Didn't expect to see you here." He approached slowly, his hands shoved in his pockets. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome." "That depends on why you came," she replied, her tone cool but not unkind. "I need help," he admitted. "Michael left plans for the farm, big ones, but I don't have the experience to make them real. Evelyn said you might be the person to talk to." Rebecca studied him, arms crossed. "Funny. You left this place behind years ago, and now you show up asking for help to save it." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know how it looks. And you're right, I abandoned it. I abandoned him. But I can't change the past. All I can do is try to finish what Michael started." For a long moment, Rebecca said nothing. Then she exhaled, the sharp edge of her voice softening. "Michael had good ideas. He was stubborn, but he listened when it counted. You'll have to prove you can do the same." "I'll listen," Daniel promised. "I don't have the luxury of pride anymore." Rebecca gave a faint smile, the first hint of warmth. "Then let's start with the soil. If you don't get that right, nothing else matters." They spent the afternoon walking the fields, Rebecca kneeling to test the earth between her fingers, explaining the importance of rotation, composting, and water management. Daniel followed, listening intently, asking questions, scribbling notes like a student desperate not to miss a lesson. As the sun dipped low, painting the farm in amber light, they paused at the edge of the property. Rebecca glanced at him. "This won't be easy, Daniel. But if you're serious, I'll help. Not for you, but for Michael. And for the land." Daniel nodded, gratitude swelling in his chest. "That's more than I could ask for." For the first time, he didn't feel like he was standing against the weight of the farm alone. He had found an ally, and maybe, just maybe, something more than that waited between them. Spring rolled into full bloom, and with it came long hours of work that seemed to stitch Daniel deeper into the land. With Rebecca's guidance, the soil grew richer, the seedlings stronger, and the rows of crops straighter. The farm was breathing again, but Daniel knew it wasn't enough to convince the town or the bank. If Michael's dream was ever going to take root, it had to become more than his personal redemption. It had to be a community's hope. Rebecca leaned against the fence one afternoon, wiping dirt from her hands. "You can't do this in secret. People need to see what's happening here, and they need to know where it's going." Daniel frowned. "You think they'd even listen?" "Most of them don't trust me. They see me as the guy who left." "That's exactly why you have to stand in front of them," she said firmly. "If you want their respect, show them what you're building. Invite them to be part of it." The idea gnawed at him for days, until finally he walked into town and posted flyers at the diner, the post office, and the church. Town meeting at Hayes Farm. Saturday evening. Discussion on the future of the land. Future. When the evening came, Daniel stood nervously in the barn, its repaired roof and swept floor now serving as a gathering place. The blueprints were spread on a long table, illuminated by hanging lanterns. He adjusted his shirt collar, his palms damp. Rebecca stood nearby, offering a reassuring nod. Slowly, people arrived. Neighbors, farmhands, townsfolk who had known the Hayes family for generations. Evelyn came with a basket of cookies, placing them on the table as though softening the mood. Sheriff Tom leaned against the wall, his eyes sharp but watchful. Even Carl, grease still on his hands from fixing tractors, showed up. Daniel cleared his throat, the murmur of voices fading. "Thank you all for coming. I know some of you are skeptical about me, and I don't blame you. I left when Michael stayed. I turned my back on this place and he carried the weight alone. For that, I'll always regret my choices." He paused, scanning the faces before him, some hardened, some curious. But Michael didn't give up. He had plans, big ones, plans for a farm that wouldn't just survive but thrive. He believed this land could be more than rows of corn and soy. He believed it could be a hub for sustainable farming, for new jobs, for a future that would benefit this entire community. I found his blueprints, and I want to finish what he started. He unrolled the drawings, his voice steadying as he explained the designs. Greenhouses that could extend growing seasons, solar panels to cut costs, a co-op market to sell directly to townsfolk. His words painted a vision of not just survival, but growth. Murmurs rose among the crowd. One man shook his head. "Dreams don't pay bills, Hayes." Daniel met his eyes. "I know, but action does. I'm not asking you to believe blindly. I'm asking for your hands, your time, your ideas. Together we can prove this works. If the harvest succeeds, the bank will back us. If it fails, then you can say you were right about me, but I need the chance." The barn grew quiet. Sheriff Tom finally spoke, his voice even. "Talk's one thing, work's another. But I've seen him out here, sweating with the rest of us. He's not just talking." Rebecca stepped forward. "This isn't just Daniel's dream or Michael's. It can be ours. The question is whether we're willing to risk a little faith." Slowly, heads nodded. Carl spoke up. "I'll back him. Michael believed in this, and I see the kid working harder than I ever thought he could." By the time the meeting ended, not everyone was convinced, but a shift had begun. Doubt was still there, but so was something else. Hope. As the crowd dispersed, Evelyn touched Daniel's arm. "So you gave them something to think about. That's the first step." Daniel exhaled, relief mingling with resolve. For the first time, the farm felt less like a burden carried alone, and more like a future shared. Summer came with heat that pressed down on the fields like a weight. Daniel worked from dawn until long after the sun slipped below the horizon, his skin darkened by the sun, his hands calloused from endless labor. The community had offered help, but the burden still rested squarely on his shoulders. Each day tested his resolve, and each night he fell into bed too tired to dream. The crops had begun to sprout in neat rows, green against the dark soil, a fragile promise of what could be. Rebecca walked the fields with him often, kneeling to inspect the plants, teaching him how to spot signs of disease or thirst. "You can't just put them in the ground and hope," she told him. "You have to listen to them. They'll tell you what they need if you pay attention." Daniel tried to listen. He poured himself into the work, but the farm seemed intent on testing him. One afternoon, a storm swept in with no warning. Winds tore through the fields, bending the young plants nearly flat. Rain lashed the soil until it turned to mud. Daniel stood on the porch, his heart pounding, powerless to stop it. When the storm finally passed, he walked the rows in despair, seeing leaves torn and stalks broken. He dropped to his knees in the mud, his hands gripping the ruined stems. "I can't do this," he muttered, the words breaking against the lump in his throat. "I'm not him, I'm not Michael." Rebecca came to stand beside him, her voice steady. Michael wasn't a miracle worker either. He fought storms just like this. The difference is he didn't stop after them, neither can you. Her words cut through his despair, but doubts lingered. Every setback made him feel the weight of expectation heavier, as if Michael's ghost were watching to see if he would break. Then came the machinery failure. The old irrigation pump groaned one morning and died altogether. Daniel spent hours bent over it, grease on his hands, cursing under his breath. Carl came by and shook his head. Needs more than a quick fix. This pump's on its last legs. Daniel wanted to throw the wrench across the barn. If the crops don't get water, everything dies. Carl spat into the dirt. Then we fix it. Might take all night, but we'll fix it. Together they worked until dawn, replacing parts, improvising repairs, coaxing life back into the machine. When water finally flowed through the pipes again, Daniel slumped against the barn wall, his body spent, but his spirit flickering back to life. Days blurred into weeks. The crops grew taller, greener, sturdier. Against every hardship, they had survived. When the first ears of corn appeared, Daniel stood among the rows, brushing his hands over the husks, or softening the exhaustion in his face. Rebecca joined him, her smile quiet but proud. "This is it, Daniel. Proof." He let out a long breath, his chest swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope that didn't feel fragile but strong. "Michael would have loved to see this," he said softly. Rebecca's eyes softened. "Then maybe he does." Harvest season arrived, and the fields gave more than Daniel dared hope for. The corn was plentiful, the vegetables crisp, the soil rich with promise. The barn filled with crates of produce, and neighbors came to help gather, their laughter and voices weaving life back into the land. For the first time, the Hayes farm didn't feel like a memory of what had been. It felt like a beginning. As Daniel loaded the first crates onto a truck bound for town, he paused to look over the fields bathed in golden light. His brother's vision wasn't just surviving, it was alive. And deep inside, Daniel knew the real trial was no longer whether the land could endure, but whether he had the strength to carry it forward. The air carried the sweet scent of harvest, rich with the promise of renewal. Daniel stood in the middle of the fields as the last crates were lifted onto wagons. Around him, neighbors laughed and called to one another, their voices weaving together into something that sounded like belonging. For the first time in years, the farm wasn't silent. It was alive. Evelyn walked up beside him, her hands clasped behind her back. "Your father would have been proud," she said softly. "And your brother, too." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the rows that stretched toward the horizon. "I don't know if I've earned that yet, but I finally understand what they both were fighting for. It was never just about the land. It was about the people tied to it." She nodded. "And now you're tied to it too." Later that evening, the barn filled with townsfolk gathered to celebrate the harvest. Lanterns glowed from the rafters, music played faintly from an old radio, and the tables overflowed with food. Daniel stood before them, humbled by the sight of people who had once doubted him now eating, smiling, and calling this place part of their own. Sheriff Tom raised a glass, to Michael Hayes for his dream, and to Daniel Hayes for having the grit to see it through. The crowd echoed the toast, and Daniel felt a warmth swell in his chest, not from the drink in his hand, but from the acceptance in their voices. Rebecca approached, her smile small but steady. "You did it," she said. "No," Daniel replied, shaking his head. "We did it." Michael planted the dream. "You, Evelyn, Carl, everyone here, you helped it grow. I just finally stopped running." Her eyes softened, and for a moment they simply stood in the glow of lantern light, the unspoken bond between them strong and undeniable. As the night wore on, Daniel slipped outside for a breath of quiet. The fields stretched before him, shimmering under the moonlight. He pulled Michael's letter from his jacket pocket, unfolding it carefully. The words, though read 100 times, still carried the weight of his brother's voice. "I hope I made you proud, Mike," he whispered into the night. "I couldn't save you, but maybe I can save this." The wind rustled through the corn, as if offering an answer. Standing there, Daniel realized he had come full circle. He had returned to the farm out of guilt and grief, but now he stayed out of love for his brother, for the land, and for the community that had given him a second chance. The city no longer called to him the way it once had. Its glass towers seemed like shadows compared to the light of this place. Here he wasn't just building structures, he was building something lasting, something rooted. He folded the letter, sliding it back into his pocket with care. The responsibility no longer felt like a weight that might crush him. It felt like a mantle he was ready to carry. Inside the barn, the music swelled and laughter rang out. Daniel turned toward the sound, a faint smile breaking across his face. Tomorrow there would be more work, more challenges, more doubts to face. But tonight there was hope, and for the first time in years Daniel felt at peace with where he belonged. If stories like this move you as deeply as Daniel's journey, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. His path shows that even in loss, there can be redemption, and even in endings there can be new beginnings. And don't stop here. Click the video on your screen to discover the next powerful story waiting for you.